I need a constant reminder of that. So, all right, we're going to try to get through with the book today as best we can. All right, so we left off yesterday with the, you know, two-thirds, 67%, approximately 70% of American people don't believe that JFK was killed by Lee Harvey Oswald, that there was a conspiracy. And Jim Garrison is about to launch his investigation. In February 1968, Garrison subpoenaed Dulles to testify before the New Orleans grand jury, which undoubtedly came as a cold slap for a man accustomed to be invited to speak before gatherings like the Brookings Institute, the Princeton alumni, and the CFR, not to mention the Carnegie Endowment for War. As Garrison and his investigators examined the work of the Warren Commission, they discovered that leads pointing to the CIA had been covered up neatly by the panel's point man for intelligence issues, Allen Dulles. Everything kept coming back to Cuba and the Bay of Pigs and the CIA. New Orleans DA wanted to question Dulles under oath about the CIA's connection to Oswald and local figures in the Kennedy case, like David Ferrie and Guy Bannister, whose paths crisscrossed. The Garrison investigation set off alarm bells in the CIA headquarters, and it soon became clear there was a lot of discussion going on. However, the authority of the crusading district attorney was no match for the U.S. intelligence establishment. Days after Garrison sent off the Dulles subpoena to the nation's capital, he received a letter from the U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C., informing the DA that he declined to serve the subpoena on Dulles. Meanwhile, the CIA, which by then was led by Helms, mounted an aggressive counterattack on the DA, because it's all about truth and justice. Subpoenas like the one sent to Dulles were simply ignored. Government records were destroyed. Garrison's office was infiltrated by spies, and agency assets in the media worked to turn the DA into a crackpot. Even the private investigator Garrison hired to sweep his office for the electronic bugs was a CIA operative. After Dulles was subpoenaed by Garrison, the security specialist, Gordon Novel, Novel, phoned the spy master to slip him inside information about the DA's strategy. In the end, Garrison's powerful enemies managed to turn the tables on him, and the New Orleans prosecutor himself became the target of an investigation on trumped-up federal corruption charges. This is what happens to you, he observed years later, when you do not go along with the government and their coup. Despite the public's overwhelming rejection of the Warren report, Dulles could count on unwavering support in Washington, the establishment, and the corporate media. An exchange of letters between CBS News director William Small and Dulles in July of 1967 summed up the media's lockstep allegiance to the official story, no matter how many holes were punched into it by new research. Quote, I hope you had a chance to view the 4-part series on the Warren Commission, unquote, wrote Small. He was referring to his TV network's massive apology for the Warren report. Quote, we are very proud of them, and I hope you found them a proper display of what television journalists can do, unquote. Dulles commended Small for a job well done, although he noted that he had missed the third installment after reviewing transcripts of the entire series that Small had obligingly provided him. Dulles assured CBS News executive, quote, if I had any nitpicking to pass on to you, I shall do it as soon as I have read them, unquote. Even the prominent group of men who had served President Kennedy were loath to break ranks with the establishment on the Warren report. Dark calls of conspiracy had begun circulating within the Kennedy ranks, immediately after Dallas. But with the exception of Dick Goodwin, no one dared voice them in public. Author Schlesinger was cast adrift by Kennedy's murder. The scholar had thrived in Kennedy's court, where his intellectual and political aspirations intersected. Working in the Kennedy White House not only gave Schlesinger a voice in global affairs, it offered him the intellectual, as an intellectual, a chance to rub elbows with everyone. He gossiped over lunch with actresses and actors about Frank Sinatra, who had been deeply wounded when he was jettisoned from the Kennedy circle because of his association with the mob. Schlesinger was sipping midday cocktails with publishing queen Kay Graham and her Newsweek editors, who had flown him to New York to advise them on a magazine makeover. Schlesinger soon realized that he was the odd man out in the anti-intellectual Johnson administration. More than a month after the assassination, Schlesinger confided in his journal he still had not received a single communication from the new president, not a request to do anything, nor an invitation to a single meeting. The entire mood of the White House suddenly shifted under Schlesinger's feet. LBJ differs from JFK in a number of ways, he said, most notably, perhaps, in the absence of intellectual curiosity. He has the senatorial habit of knowing only what is necessary to know for the moment and then forgetting it as soon as the moment has passed. LBJ lacks the supreme FDR JFK gift of keeping a great many things in his head, remembering them all, and then demanding to know new things. Schlesinger's early resignation from the Johnson administration, which came 7 months before Bobby Kennedy's own departure to run for Senate, solidified his position of trust within the Kennedy enclave. The historian was the recipient of murmured confidences from Bobby and Jackie and members of their entourage. Schlesinger heard disturbing reports about events in Dallas. RFK told him that he was racked with the suspicion about what had happened to his brother. Even CIA Director McCone thought there were 2 people involved in the shooting, Kennedy confided to Schlesinger. Meanwhile, Air Force General Godfrey McHugh, who had served as JFK's military aide in Dallas, gave Schlesinger a harrowing account of the ghastly afternoon when they bumped into each other at the French embassy party in June. McHugh, who found LBJ huddled in the bathroom of his private quarters on Air Force One before the plane took off from Dallas, the panic-stricken Johnson was convinced that there was a conspiracy and that he would be next. Right. Schlesinger took an interest in the first wave of Kennedy conspiracy articles that began appearing in the press, sending RFK a piece titled Seeds of Doubt from the December 21st, 1963 of the New Republic. Nobody was more aware than Schlesinger of the explosive tension that surged within the Kennedy presidency. Quote, certainly we did not control the Joint Chiefs of Staff, unquote. And he knew from his futile efforts to reform the CIA, the Kennedy White House perhaps had even less control over it. But despite Schlesinger's inside knowledge of Washington's power struggle during Kennedy's years and his ability to see through the shoddy work of the Warren Report, the historian did nothing to explore the truth. In the years after the assassination, Schlesinger secured his reputation as the official historian of Kennedy's Camelot with his Pulitzer Prize-winning book, A Thousand Days. In 1965, the 1965 bestseller, which carefully avoided the unanswered questions of the murder, earned him intellectual celebrity status and opened new doors at cocktail parties. His bold-faced name popped up in New York gossip columns, including the sighting at a Norman Mailer party in January of 67. Schlesinger was frequently invited to appear on talk shows that year. He found himself in Los Angeles at a TV station where he was the guest of local news personality Stan Borman. After the show, he asked the host asked Schlesinger whether he would be willing to meet backstage with Ray Marcus, a respected Warren Report critic. Marcus, who had concluded that the official report was the most massively fraudulent document ever foisted on a free society. That's a quote from him. Thought that it was urgent that former Kennedy officials like Schlesinger examine his photographic evidence. He was certain it would convince the new frontiersmen that there had been a conspiracy. But when Schlesinger set eyes on Marcus's display, in which the Zapruder film's infamous frame 313 kill shot, he visibly paled. I can't look. I won't look, Schlesinger said, turning his head and walking away. This was a perfect summation of the attitude among the Kennedy crowd. It was best not to linger on the horrors of Dallas. Despite bad blood between Kennedy and the CIA, Schlesinger managed to maintain relations with the spy set after Dallas. He had throughout his career. Schlesinger kept up a friendly, chatty correspondence with Dulles. Schlesinger even commiserated with the spy master over Hugh Trevor's Roper's disgraceful piece in the London Sunday Times, in which the eminent Oxford historian denounced the Warren Report as suspect. After Dulles sent him the letter, Schlesinger wrote again, informing Dulles that British political scientist Dennis Brogan was working on a detailed dissection of the Trevor Roper article for the CIA-funded Encounter magazine. Perhaps if you are feeling up to it, Schlesinger said, I could come by and see you one of these afternoons. Schlesinger's courtship of Dulles in the midst of the controversy was odd. The cordial relationship between Schlesinger and Dulles suffered a bit of a strain in the summer of 65 when Life magazine ran an account of the Bay of Pigs that was excerpted out of 1,000 Days. In his book, Schlesinger put the onus for the disaster on the CIA, which he accurately wrote had maneuvered Kennedy into a sand trap. Dulles found the Life article, along with a similar one that Look magazine had taken out of Ted Sorensen's memoir, Kennedy, deeply disturbing, and he labeled them as misleading. The Schlesinger and Sorensen's broadside on the Bay of Pigs spurred Dulles into action. But after wrestling with a long belabored, bitter response for Harper's, he decided it was best to take the high road. President Kennedy had done the honorable thing and taken responsibility for it, he told journalists. He would leave it at that. By November, Dulles had resumed relationships with Schlesinger, sending him condolences on the death of his father. By October 66, Schlesinger again rushed to Dulles's defense when the secret surrender was harshly reviewed in the New York Review of Books, a revisionist historian who suggested that the spy master had helped kick off the Cold War by going around Stalin's back to cut a deal with Nazi commanders in Italy, which of course he did. Quote, I was so irritated by the wild review that I sent the magazine a letter, unquote, Schlesinger wrote to Dulles. In his letter to the review, Schlesinger ridiculed the attempt to blame the Cold War on poor old Allen Dulles. Nothing the U.S. could have done in 1945 would have dispelled Stalin's mistrust, short of the conversion of the U.S. into a Soviet-like country. When it came to fighting the cultural Cold War, Schlesinger and Dulles were still brothers in arms. It was not until many years later, long after Dulles was dead, that Schlesinger began to question his cozy relationship with the Georgetown CIA crowd. By then, some of the skeletons in the CIA closet had already came out, when it was opened just a crack by post-Watergate congressional investigations. In 78, seated at an awards banquet next to Jimmy Carter's CIA director, Admiral Stanfield Turner, who was trying to at least straighten up the closet, Schlesinger listened wide-eyed as Turner regaled him with CIA horror stories. Many of the CIA director's astonishing tales related to Jim Angleton, who, though deposed 3 years earlier, still cast a shadow over the agency. Turner obviously regarded Angleton as a madman and cannot understand a system under which he gained so much power. In September 91, Schlesinger found himself at Sun Valley estate of Pamela Harriman, Averill's widow, with fellow guest Dick Helms, with whom he had been friends ever since the days together in the OSS. Schlesinger characterized the relationship as rather wary friendship, since they both knew that there were matters on which they deeply disagreed. But for the sake of their friendship, they just didn't talk about them. Still, he had socialized regularly with Helms over the years, playing tennis and enjoying barbecues at the Helms home. One evening, Schlesinger's son Andrews accompanied him to a Helms barbecue. Quote, "I remember feeling kind of weird about being there, but my father thought he was the most honorable of the CIA people." Unquote. By 91, however, Schlesinger had begun to question his assessment of Helms. He had recently read a series of articles about the CIA brainwashing experiments on Canadian medical patients, in which Helms had played a central role. It is a terrible story of CIA recklessness and arrogance, compounded by an unwillingness to assume responsibility that went to the point of destroying incriminating documents, Schlesinger wrote in his journal. Helms was a central figure both in recommending the experiments and getting rid of the evidence. Now Schlesinger found himself relaxing in the company of Helms, who had been convicted of one felony of lying to Congress and undeniably should have been prosecuted for more. But the historian held his tongue. Quote, "In view of my long truce with Dick Helms, I certainly did not want to bring up the CIA medical experiments, but I did wonder a bit at one's capacity to continue liking people who had been involved in wicked things. Bill Casey, Reagan's CIA director, and another OSS comrade, is another example, though my friendship with Helms is considerably closer. Henry Kissinger, I guess, still another. Is this deplorable weakness or tolerance?" It's a measure of Schlesinger's that he could raise these introspective questions. It's a sign of his weakness that he could never break with the wicked men. In 1990, Schlesinger found himself dragged back into the Kennedy assassination swamp with the release of Oliver Stone's movie in 1991, JFK, a quote-unquote fictional retelling of Garrison's ill-fated investigation that proposed Kennedy was the victim of forces in his own government. On Halloween evening that year, Stone himself showed up at the door of Schlesinger's New York apartment. The filmmaker had ignited a media uproar, stoked in part by the CIA's reliable press allies, and Stone, looking for support in the Kennedy camp, was reaching out to Schlesinger. The historian found the director a charming, earnest man, but I surmise scarred into paranoia by his experience in Vietnam and dangerously susceptible to conspiracy theories. In truth, Schlesinger had long racked his own doubts about the Warren Report. His second wife, Alexandra, firmly believed that JFK was a victim of conspiracy, but to her endless frustration, Schlesinger evaded every tough question on the subject. His son Andrew later observed the historian simply didn't have the emotional resources to confront the facts surrounding the assassination. Near the end of his life, when Schlesinger was weakened by Parkinson's disease, Andrew asked him if there was one book he never wrote that he wished he had. His father got a little agitated, recalled Andrews. He said he wished he had written a book about the CIA. He felt the CIA was terribly corrupt and was corrupting our democracy. He emotionally was saying this. He believed until the end that the CIA was undermining our democracy. Moving on to the last chapter, the end game. It was always difficult for Angelita Cabrera, the woman who managed Senator RFK's New York office, to grab a few minutes of his time. As a freshman senator in New York during the 60s and the inheritor of his brother's heavy legacy, Bobby was always in demand, always on the move. There was a growing debate over Vietnam. He was sad most of the time, she later recalled. He was preoccupied most of the time about something, probably his brother. The grief that clung to Bobby did not make him a remote figure in his New York office. The senator dearly loved Angie Cabrera and his New York staff, remembered RFK aide Peter Edelman. He loved them very dearly. He just enjoyed being around them. It was a kind of a big, happy family. Cabrera would accompany Bobby to political rallies in Spanish Harlem, where Kennedy's commitment to community development and empowerment increasing his popularity. Cabrera, whose parents had immigrated from Puerto Rico to Brooklyn Heights and who had worked as an executive secretary for the governor of Puerto Rico, helped connect RFK to his Hispanic constituents. In 1967, Bobby and Ethel invited her to fly with them to the island where he scheduled to speak in the old Spanish colony city, San Germain. Kennedy was stunned by the size and exuberance of the crowd that he was greeted with in Puerto Rico. One day that same year, while working in the New York office, Cabrera barged through Bobby's door with a timely item of business. She caught him as he was finishing what seemed to be an intense phone call. As I walked in, I thought I might have heard. Actually, I didn't hear what he said, and I had no idea who he was talking to, but he thought that I did, and he trusted me. After he hung up the phone, he turned to me and said, "There's something more to this. I've got to pursue who killed my brother." In the hours and days immediately following his brother's assassination, Bobby had chased every lead he could think of, quickly concluding that JFK was a victim of a plot that had spun out of the CIA's anti-Castro operation. But after his initial burst of clarity, Bobby soon sank into a fog of despair. Unable to develop a clear plan of action, his depression came, of course, from the devastating loss of his brother. He was his North Star. But Bobby was also filled with despair because there was no clear way to respond to the murder. His mortal enemy, LBJ, was in charge of the government, and his own power as Attorney General was dwindling quickly. J. Edgar Hoover, another bitter opponent, no longer bothered returning his phone calls. Meanwhile, RFK's antagonists, such as Hoover and Dulles, were in control of the official murder investigation. I can't even imagine. He knows the CIA was involved in it, and have them investigating it had to be like fingernails on a chalkboard. If RFK tried to circumvent the system and take his suspicions directly to the American people, he risked sparking a civil war. The astute writer and political activist M.S. Arnani, in fact, drew such a chilling scenario in December 1963 article he published in The Minority of One, a publication to which Kennedy's Senate office subscribed. Quote, to move against such formidable conspirators might start a disastrous chain of events. It could lead to American troops shooting at other American troops. It could lead to a direct takeover by a military clique. To avert such catastrophe, it might well be considered prudent to pretend utter ignorance in the hope that the conspirators might be removed from power discreetly at a later date. one by one, unquote. And so, for the most part, Bobby Kennedy maintained a silence on the subject of his brother's assassination. In private, he dismissed the Warren report as a PR exercise, but he knew that if he attacked the report in public, it would set off a political uproar that he was in no position to exploit. When the report was released in late September 1964, Bobby was on the Senate campaign trail in New York. He tried to avoid commenting at length on the report and canceling campaign appearances that morning. He was obliged to issue a statement giving the inquiry his blessing, but adding, "I have not read the report, nor do I intend to." It was an impossible balancing act that Bobby would strain to make for the rest of his life. The CIA used Kennedy's silence to bolster the Warren report. Quote, "Note that Robert Kennedy would be the last man to overlook or conceal any conspiracy," unquote. Total bastards. But by 1967, emboldened by the growing campaign to reopen the JFK case and Jim Garrison's investigation, Bobby began refocusing on Dallas. Before he deflected friends' efforts to discuss their suspicions about the case, but now he tentatively began probing the antagonizing wound. After seeing Garrison's face on a magazine cover at the airport, the senator turned to his press aide, Frank Mankiewicz, and asked him to begin reading all of the assassination literature he could find. "So if it gets to a point where I can do something about this, you can tell me what I need to know." Meanwhile, Kennedy sent his trusted friend and longtime investigator, former FBI agent Walter Sheridan, to New Orleans to size up Garrison's operation. The ex-G man took an immediately disliking to the flamboyant DA and reported back to Bobby that Garrison was a fraud. Sheridan's take on Garrison, which was reflected in the harsh NBC News special that Sheridan helped produce in June, foiled Garrison's efforts to build an investigative alliance with RFK. Garrison Camp implored Kennedy to speak out about the conspiracy, arguing that such a public stand might even protect his own life by putting the conspirators on notice. But RFK preferred to play such deeply crucial matters close to chest. He would reopen the case on his own terms, Kennedy confided to his close aides, suggesting that the day he became the president was the day that would happen. One of the things you learn when you're around Kennedy, you learn what it was to be serious, an RFK aide said, Adam Walensky. Serious people, when faced with something like that, you don't speculate out loud about it. He had an acute understanding of how difficult the kind of investigation is, even if you had all the power of the presidency. On March 16th, 68, RFK announced his candidacy for president. He was motivated, he said, by a desire to end the bloodshed in Vietnam and in our cities, and to close the gap between black and white, between rich and poor, between young and old in the country. Oh my gosh, big target on him. Kennedy left unstated the other reason, the main reason that still tormented his family. RFK launched his presidential campaign in the same chandeliered room in the old Senate building where his brother had declared his bid for the White House 8 years earlier. But a more somber mood hung over Bobby's announcement. Not only was the country and RFK's own policy more torn by war and racial division than in 1960, but there was an acute sense that his own life might be at stake. After Richard Nixon and several aides sat watching Kennedy announce his presidential run in a hotel room, the TV was turned off and Nixon sat silently looking at a blank screen for a long time. Finally, he shook his head and said, "Something bad is going to come of this." He pointed to the dark stream. God knows where this is going to lead. A few days after RFK's announcement, Jackie Kennedy, who had begged him not to run, fell into a bleak conversation with Schlesinger at a New York party. "Do you know what I think will happen to Bobby? The same thing that happened to Jack." Bobby Kennedy, the father of 10 children with an 11th on the way, was terribly aware of the risk he was taking. but notwithstanding the youthful euphoria around Senator Eugene McCarthy's children's crusade for president, there was no political figure in America besides Bobby that had the ability to win the White House and heal the country. Kennedy spent many days, long, anguished nights, wrestling with his decision. At one point, he sought the advice of Walter Lippmann, one of the last of his breed in Washington. Well, if you believe that Johnson's reelection would be a catastrophe for the country, I entirely agree with you on this. Then, if this comes about, the question you must live with is whether you did everything you could to avert this catastrophe. Kennedy's mere entry into the race was enough to panic LBJ into abandoning his reelection bid. But there still was Johnson's surrogate, Hubert Humphrey, to contend with, as well as Nixon. Entering the campaign late, Kennedy threw himself into the primary race with determination, knowing that he was fighting an uphill battle against the Democrat Party establishment as well as competing with McCarthy for the anti-war vote. Bobby waded virtually unprotected into frenzied crowds on every stop of the campaign. His presidential race was perhaps the bravest, most reckless in American history. Living every day like he was playing Russian roulette. RFK was so moved by something Ralph Waldo Emerson had written that he copied it down and carried it with him. Always do what you are afraid to do. Bobby's courage gave strength to those around him, to those ambitious, idealistic men who had served his brother and were now following the RFK into his perilous path. His heroism inspired their own. Men like Schlesinger, who could not bring himself to break from the establishment without a Kennedy leading, and Kennedy O'Donnell, who had begun drinking himself to death instead of telling the world what he had seen that day in Dealey Square Plaza with his own eyes, and even Robert McNamara, who had allowed himself to be debased by his allegiance to Johnson and the folly of war. They now rallied around the new Kennedy crusade, and they were better men for doing so. They joined the battle of for America's soul. JFK's assassins knew that Robert Kennedy was the only man who could bring them to justice. They had sought to keep him close after Dallas, with Dulles showering his condolences on the Kennedy family. Quote, you have been much in my thoughts, and Jackie, Ethel, and you have my deepest respect and admiration, unquote, was the note that Dulles wrote to RFK. He made sure that Bobby, as well as his parents and siblings, received complete, bound set copies of the Warren Report. He fell all over himself in eagerness to respond to queries from RFK, including Bobby's request for him to sit for an interview with the Kennedy Library. In his oral history for the library, Dulles further disgraced himself and the memory of JFK by singing false praises of the slain president. But when RFK announced his run for presidency, he became a wild card, an uncontrollable threat. The danger grew as Kennedy got closer to the goal of winning the Democrat nomination. June 4th, California primary would be the make or break moment of his campaign. If he won the Golden State, he was unstoppable. Oh God, not again. That was the collective moan that erupted from the deep within the crowd at Los Angeles Ambassador Hotel on the night of Kennedy's victory, as he lay mortally wounded in the grimy floor of the hotel pantry. As in Dallas, official reports immediately pinned sole responsibility on a troubled loner, a 24-year-old Palestinian immigrant, Sirhan. The accused assassin was undeniably involved in the shooting, as Senator Kennedy and his entourage made their way through the crowded, dimly lit hotel pantry on the way to the press briefing room. But numerous eyewitnesses, including one of the men who subdued Sirhan, insisted the alleged assassin could not have fired the shot that killed Kennedy. Sirhan was several feet in front of Kennedy when he began firing his revolver, but the fatal shot that struck RFK at point-blank range behind his right ear, penetrating his brain, was fired from behind. Furthermore, evidence indicated that 13 shots were fired in the pantry that night, 5 more than the number of bullets that Sirhan's gun held. Dr. Thomas Nakochi, the Los Angeles coroner who conducted the autopsy on Kennedy, thought that all of the evidence pointed to a second gunman. Thus, I have never said that Sirhan killed RFK, he flatly said in his memoirs in 1983. Then there was Sirhan himself. Like Oswald, he did not claim credit for the assassination. In fact, from the moment he was taken into custody, he seemed perplexed by the tragedy in which he found himself playing a starring role. The dazed Sirhan had no memory of attacking Kennedy. He struck many observers as being hypnotized, like a Manchurian candidate. The security guard named Thang Eugene Cesar, who guided Kennedy into the pantry, later fell under suspicion. He was seen pulling his gun in the chaos when it erupted, but investigators quickly cleared him, and his gun was never tested. Over the years, Cesar's possible role in the assassination has been debated by researchers and lawyers associated with the case. Some, like Sirhan's current legal team, declared that Cesar, if not the actual assassin, played a role in the plot. Others, like investigative journalist Dan Moldia, authored a book on RFK's assassination, insist on the innocence of Cesar, who is still alive. Jean Cesar is an innocent man, he declared, who had wrongly been accused in the RFK murder case, and any claim to the contrary is simply not true. Moldia emailed the author of this book in 2015, adding that he now acts as Cesar's spokesperson and his power of attorney. Yeah, so he's not an independent person. John Meyer, a former executive in Howard Hughes's Las Vegas organization, has tied Cesar to CIA contractor Robert Mayhew, who was hired by Hughes to run his Vegas operation in the 60s. Meyer claims he was introduced to Cesar in Las Vegas before the RFK assassination by Jack Hooper, Robert Mayhew's security chief. Meyer also stated that after Kennedy's murder, he was warned by Robert Mayhew and Hooper never to mention Cesar's name and his connection to Robert Mayhew. And Robert Mayhew is a CIA contractor. But Mayhew strongly denied the accusation. Quote, everything about Meyer is a lie, unquote. He was a 14-carat phony. Cesar, too, has rejected Meyer's accusation, with Moldia speaking on behalf of the former security guard, dismissing them as just more garbage being peddled. Robert Mayhew pointed out that Meyer was accused of evading taxes on money he allegedly skimmed from the Hughes mining deals and was convicted of a related charge of forgery. Now, Mayhew was actually doing that, FYI, but it was Mayhew himself who was the biggest crook. Hughes told the press after fleeing Las Vegas in 1970, Mayhew was a no-good, dishonest son of a bitch who stole me blind. While running Hughes's gambling casinos, Robert Mayhew had made sweetheart deals with mobsters and allowed the CIA to pay off politicians with Hughes cash and to exploit Hughes's corporate empire as a front for spy activities. While Robert Mayhew was being paid over $500,000 by Hughes a year, he still treated the CIA like his top client. Robert Mayhew never concealed his hatred for the Kennedys. He even accused JFK of homicide during his testimony before the church committee for withholding air support at the Bay of Pigs. As far as I'm concerned, he was quoted as saying, those volunteers got off the boats that day were murdered. But Mayhew denied playing any role in the Kennedy assassinations. As with his brother's death, the investigation of RFK's murder would become clouded and a part of a murky agenda. There were hints of CIA involvement, mafia corruption, and once again, glaring displays of official negligence. Sirhan's prosecution was a streamlined process, with the defendant often seeming very confused at his own trial. Just like JFK's inquest, the outcome was never in doubt. Sirhan has spent the bulk of his life in prison, with periodic requests for retrial denied. Alan Dulles, who turned 75 in April of 68, kept up a busy schedule all that year, despite Clover and Mary's concerns. Dulles continued attending meetings at the CFR, Intelligence Study Groups, and Princeton Board of Trustees. There were luncheons at the Alibi Club, embassy parties, regular get togethers with Angleton, Jim Hunt, and Howard Roman. Not even the civil unrest in Washington, ignited by the assassination of MLK that April, seemed to faze Dulles. After King's assassination, his followers took their fallen leader's Poor People's Campaign to the nation's capital, erecting a protest encampment on the National Mall. On June 24th, after more than 1,000 police officers swept into the camp, dispersing the protesters, riots again broke out in the streets of the capital, prompting official calls for the National Guard and to declare a curfew. But Dulles did not let them affect his social life. "You can rest assured that everything remains quiet here," Dulles told a friend of his. The afternoon, Dulles continued. That afternoon, Dulles continued. He planned to go to a CIA social gathering with Jim Hunt and his wife. Quote, "I'm afraid I will have to pass up Marion Glover's afternoon affair, as I cannot go to both," he would tell Clover. There was just so much for him to do. The last month, that same month, Dulles found time to sit down and write a condolence letter to the brother of another murdered Kennedy. "Dear Ted," he wrote, "the last Kennedy brother. Quote, I join with the multitude of others in expressing to you my deep sorrow. I had the opportunity of working with Bobby on many occasions and had great respect for his dynamic approach to our national problems and his vigor and forthrightness in dealing with them. His death is a great loss to the country and especially to those like yourself who were so close to him. I send my profound sympathy." I'm about to puke. Ted Kennedy responded, basically saying that, "Thank you for the message. At this time of sadness, nothing is more helpful than hearing from a friend." On July 8th, according to his day calendar, Dulles made time to meet with Dr. Stephen Chow, an American university professor who was an expert in China and Russian brainwashing techniques. Dulles had known Chow, a former CIA researcher, for a long time. The mind control expert had reached out to Dulles in June, arranging a time to discuss his latest work on political psychology. Then on July 8th, a few days after his meeting with Chow, Dulles met with Sidney Gottlieb, the pharmaceutical wizard that made all the poisons and was in charge of the MK Ultra mind control program. These meetings on Dulles's calendar are particularly intriguing, coming just weeks after the assassination of RFK and the arrest of Sirhan, a man who appeared to have been hypnotic or in a narcotic state when he was taken into custody, fitting the mold of an MK Ultra subject. That summer, Dulles continued to keep a close watch on Jim Garrison's investigation. In July, Angleton Deputy Ray Roca phoned Dulles to discuss an article about the New Orleans prosecutor by Edward J. Epstein. Where's Illini? In the New Yorker. In September, CIA mole Gordon Novel called Dulles to give him another inside update on the Garrison probe. The old man's main social event of the fall season was the Washington get-together in honor of Reinhard Gehlen, the West German spy chief Dulles had resurrected from the poison ashes of the Nazi regime. On September 12th, Gehlen's U.S. sponsors threw a luncheon for him. And that night, there was a dinner for the Hitler old spy chief at Maryland home of Heinz Herre, Herre, Galen's former staff officer on the Eastern Front, who had become West Germany's top intelligence liaison in Washington, D.C. That fall, Dulles eagerly anticipated the long delayed presidential election of none other than Richard Nixon. He got involved in the Nixon campaign, joining fundraising committees and contributing his own money. On Halloween, Nixon sent Dulles, excuse me, a telegram. Thanking him for his support and appointing him vice chairman of the Eisenhower team for the Nixon-Agnew ticket. The old man had visions of returning to the center of Washington intelligence, perhaps with a prominent appointment in the new Nixon administration. But those close to him knew he was slowly fading away. Dulles would suddenly seem lost. One of his cousins said Allen would go off to lunch at the Metropolitan Club or Alibi Club and forget how to get home. Sometimes he would just get lost in the neighborhood. In December, working with Howard Roman, his longtime collaborator, Dulles finished editing a collection of espionage stories called The Great Spy Stories, featuring selections by masters of the genre, such as Eric Ambler, Graham Greene, Ian Flemings, and John le Carre. In the book's foreword, Dulles offered his final observations on the stealthy profession to which he had dedicated his life. In the past, he wrote, the spy was generally thought of as a sneaky and socially unacceptable figure. But in World War II and the Cold War, that all changed. The spy has the muscle and the daring to take the place of a discarded hero. He was the new model musketeer. None of the blood and sorrow that had flowed all around him left even a mark on Dulles. He continued to have the highest esteem for himself and his craft. As he neared the end of his life, there was no self-reflection at all. After finishing the book, Dulles came down with the flu and was confined to bed. By Christmas Eve, it had settled in his chest, turned to pneumonia. He was taken to Georgetown University Hospital, and he struggled to recover, rallying at one point to write a congratulatory note on the Nixon inauguration. But by January 29th, 1969, Dulles was finally dead. Even after death, the secret organism that Dulles had created continued to pulse. A team led by Angleton swept into the old man's home while Clover lay in bed upstairs and rifled through everything. CIA technicians installed secure phone lines to handle the flood of calls and crafted a eulogy for his memorial service. The soft-spoken church minister who was used to writing his own funeral sermons balked at reading the bombastic address that had been written by his ghostwriter Charles Murphy, with input from Angleton and Jim Hunt. But the Dulles team quickly set him straight. This is a special occasion, the minister was informed. The address has to be written by the CIA. The next day, the minister stood up in his church, whose pews were filled with CIA spooks and political dignitaries, and recited the eulogy as he was instructed to do. It is, quote, "It is a splendid watchman that many of us saw him, a famous and trusted figure in clear outline on the American ramparts, seeing that the nation could not be surprised in its sleep or be overcome in the night, except for when he wanted it to." It went on. It fell to Allen Dulles to perfect a new kind of protection. For us, as for him, patriotism set no bounds on the defense of freedom and liberty. Again, I'm about to puke. He took millions of people's lives. He stole millions more freedom and liberty. Dulles' funeral sermon was a celebration of a lawless era. Under Dulles, America's intelligence system had become a dark, invasive force at home and abroad, violating citizens' privacy, kidnapping, torturing, and killing at will. His legacy would be carried far into the future by men and women who shared his philosophy and boundless authority using the national security system. Dulles had personally shaped and inspired the future watchmen, including Helms and Angleton, as well as others like William Casey, President Reagan's defiant law-breaking CIA director, and Donald Rumsfeld, President George Bush, smugly confident conqueror of desert sands. And though they never met, Dulles also provided a template for Bush's, Dick Cheney's executive absolutism and extreme security measures in the name of national defense. Today, other faceless security bureaucrats continue to carry on Dulles' work, playing God with drone strikes from above and utilizing Orwellian surveillance technology that Dulles could have only dreamed about, with little understanding of the debt they owed to the founding fathers of modern intelligence. Dead for nearly half a century, Dulles' shadow still darkens the land. That's it.
There should be a monument to him, just not the one that they craft.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
it could look just like Moloch or the devil.
Or the one behind the Pope's thing. Yeah, something like that.
What an evil bastard.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, SR.
Thank you, Colonel, and thank everyone for being here on Spaces and on Rumble. I'm sitting here just thinking about all the stuff that this man has done. And one can say he definitely had it out for the Kennedy family. Now, Ted Kennedy, stepped on his own dick, to be honest. But everybody else, it was like, yep, okay, we're going to get you.
So, interesting.
I am surprised there's not something waiting in the wings for JFK Jr.
Well, we saw what happened to him. So, interestingly enough, I've read several articles and at least one book that believes that Ted Kennedy, that entire thing was arranged to implicate him so that they could control him. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But based on what we know, I literally put nothing past them. And I did want to awaken questioner over on Rumble says, wait, there wasn't secure phones in his house before he died. Yes. What they did was they installed more lines and assigned people to monitor those lines coming in because they knew they were going to be flooded with telephone calls that they would want to trace. So yes, all of his phones were secured. So War Hamster, did you have something?
Not really. I was not really. I was kind of working and listening in the background, but
okay.
So I didn't pay enough attention to add anything of the night.
Okay, well, it was just all nauseating vomit stuff anyway.
My favorite. That's my favorite.
Oh my gosh, it's so crazy. Why are you so mad? Go ahead.
I'm looking forward to the name change of that airport in Washington.
Me too.
I'm so happy that they actually got it out there, at least the idea of changing it.
It has to be changed.
It needs to be changed. I don't think anybody that eyes are open is happy about that name. So I'm looking forward to it. Also, a great space today. I always like saying that.
Thank
Keep
you.
up the good work.
Thank you.
And I appreciate you guys.
Maybe we need to start a petition, one of those
We do.
.org or whatever those things are. That has to happen. That's definitely something that everybody could get behind. It doesn't matter what side of the non-existing aisle you're on. Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles was two of the most evil people to ever set foot in America. And there's no freaking way that airport needs to carry that name. SR, go ahead.
All I can say is I would look forward to Dulles Airport being renamed myself. But it seems to me it's easier to rename anybody who's been a racist, had slaves, had this, that, or the other, than it will be to rename that airport.
Maybe we should call it Trump Airport.
Oh, I'd love that.
I think that's what they're actually planning on doing. They have HR 691 out there to actually change it from Dulles to Trump. So I'm looking forward to that.
Do you know there would be nothing more poetically justice than that? Nothing.
Amen.
Yeah, that would be sweet. A final stamp. And I bet they will wait until all of this gets exposed, because in all of this exposure, the CIA is going to be at the center of all of that. And that will be the impetus to change the name of the airport. So maybe I'll have to make a post about that. We definitely need to do that. Go ahead, Renee.
How about Les Wexner suddenly getting exposed? Not that we didn't already know it, but it's good to see the public announcement.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up. Who was it? Sundance, Conservative Treehouse, put out a kind of a historical timeline of Epstein, and he postulated that Wexner was the first relationship that Epstein had and how he really made his money. And that's just not true. I mean, Epstein was working with Khashoggi as far back as Iran-Contra.
Yep.
And I put that on Sundance's, responded to his tweet. And someone else came in and actually said, Grok says you're correct about Khashoggi. So I'm hoping he corrects that narrative. But you're seeing a lot of the wrong information being put out there, as always, even though we know for a fact what the actual timeline is. Those have actually really done the digging. We've laid out the right proper timeline, and people are ignoring that. And it's weird, because I think Sundance is one of the better alternative, news sources out there, or opinion writers. And I've never suspected him of having ulterior motives. But to get something that blatantly wrong for someone who's that good of a researcher had me scratching my head, and I hope he makes the correction.
So I'm going to have to go find that. Yeah, maybe if we all pile on. So could you post that, War Hamster? Tag me in it, so that I can ask everybody to make sure that they put that on his timeline in response to his post, so that he is forced to correct it. Because this is where all of our research comes into play and can be very helpful in getting the word out. Did you want to say something else, War Hamster?
No, I'm in the middle of I'm just getting ready to hit that post for you.
Okay. All right.
You can
Sorry, I muted you when you said you were done. Sorry. Renee, go ahead.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm in a parking garage.
I can hear you.
Sound okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for this book. It's really with when we have our Gladio glasses on, it's really like the culmination of all these groups we've learned about, whether it be the Cuban exiles, the OAS, the CIA, all the players are present. The mafia. It's kind of like almost like the movie Ocean's 11, when they have some scam or heist they're going to do, they call all the troops, to get together. And so it's kind of it's like doubling, tripling down, and everybody's there. It's hard. It's so much bigger than I originally thought. It was. I never really studied this whole assassination thing, and I'm curious because JFK, his dad was kind of involved in the mafia, correct, and bootlegging and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, growing up, wasn't he kind of privy to the shenanigans and the shady stuff going on? What do you think?
So that's hard to say. There are instances, especially when you're very young. And Joe Kennedy, while he was involved in that kind of stuff back in the 30s, had become a legitimate businessman on outward appearances. And the way the mafia worked back then wasn't the way it's portrayed in the movies. So you can still and I'll give you a perfect example of this. We had down here in my little Central Florida hometown, we had a family move here from New York. They were Italian. And supposedly the dad had worked for the post office, but he was way too young to have retired from the post office. And he never had a job. And his oldest son was in my class, and his youngest son was in my sister's class and my husband's class, 2 years younger. And we lived within a very close proximity. We rode the same bus. No one. And they were best friends with my husband's parents. No one ever suspected that he had mafia ties. He had family up there, as they all did, but every once in a while, he'd get a phone call and he'd be gone for a week or two. And then he'd come back home and like nothing ever happened. He was part of a very nefarious organization that did some very nefarious things, we found out later on. But his kids certainly didn't know what he did. They just thought he was going to visit friends, family in New York. And so it is now. Do they know now? Yes, they know. As a matter of fact, one of them married a Chicago mafia princess. But they considered people that their parents socialized with and came down to visit occasionally just part of their family. So it is possible that they do some really nefarious things early on and make all of this money and then become outwardly a regular businessman, even though their business may be laundering money. It's invisible to a lot of people until after the fact, when somebody really smart goes back and starts tracing all of this stuff to disclose it. So I don't know what they knew about their dad, and I don't know when they knew it. But at some point, I believe that the vigor in which RFK went out after the mafia may indicate that at some point they figured it all out and wanted to get rid of it. They didn't have a lot of luck at it. SR, go ahead.
Thank you, Colonel. Just sitting here thinking about this, another thought crossed my mind with Alan Dulles. I'm not sure that I would have called him the spy master. If anything, I think this man had a hard-on for Alexander the Great. when you stop and think about what he's done, how many countries he's involved in overthrowing, and all the murder, everything, that was Alexander the Great.
Yeah. The difference is that, in my opinion, Allen Dulles was the Praetorian Guard for the Alexander Great figures, because he wasn't doing it for his own wealth or whatever. He was doing it as an agent for other people. He knew what his place was, and he fulfilled his mission that he was given. And that's the piece that we can't ever forget. He was acting on behalf of the Rockefellers and all of the other nefarious people at the CFR that were all of the people at the CFR. It was kind of, if you think about it, especially with its ties to the Royal International Institute, whatever, the RIIA, they were part of an operation that continued, as Warhamster has said many times. It's just the perpetuation of the East and West Indies of the old age, just in different forms. And it was a continuation of the effort to dominate the world and extract resources while imprisoning people in the long-term quest to establish one world government. So I don't put him at Alexander the Great level. I put him at the Praetorian Guard that would have protected someone like him.
That explanation, Colonel, all I can say is this thought just ran through my head.
Yeah.
Don't
No.
ask me why?
Yeah.
But somebody's going to holler and scream he's a victim of MK Ultra.
Yeah, he definitely was not. He was just the devil in reincarnate. Renee, go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're sharing, because with the timeline and what we've all learned here in the plan, say from the Fabians, World War I, World War II, stay behinds, and just the creepy spider web covering the whole world and their plans, Operation Gladio, Operation Condor, and really drumming up the natural resources across the Americas and Latin America, South America. Kennedy was in the way. And he was kind of like a big road bump that they were not having to get in the way of their plans, because there were too many of the people and the figures in the shadows for him to get in the way of their goal of the one world order and the abundance and the greed and the control that had been planned for so long. But then it kind of makes you also wonder, because he wrote that and shared that incredible speech. When was that? Was that 61 or 62 about secret societies and everything? Anybody know what year that was?
I have it here. Hold on, I'll find it.
I think it was
61.
like a year or 61, and he was assassinated in 63, right?
Yeah, he said that in his first year in office.
Yeah, so it's like he was kind of on to the shadiness, the shady hustlers, and it's kind of like, gosh, what happened to his security? Were they just all in on it, or because that was...
Well, his Secret Service certainly was in on it.
Yeah, super tragic.
His CIA was in on it. The NSC was in on it. Yeah. So AP Jonas over on Rumble, Ohio State Wexner Medical Center is on my jacket and coffee Yeti. Yuck. I love it. Yeah, I love it. All right. If no one else has anything, we're going to go ahead and call it a day. We'll start a new book tomorrow, and I will be on Badlands Media with CanCon and Ash, continuing our book critique of The Stolen Elections by Ralph Pezzullo. Pezzulo, and it only goes downhill from where we've already been, and we were already in the gutter. So you definitely want to stay tuned for that. That will be on live at 6 o'clock tonight. It's absolutely incredible. And thank you all for those of you who are helping with our video project. There's been 4 or 5 people that have donated to that. I can't thank you enough for doing that. I got kind of a sneak peek today of kind of where I wanted it to go and how it's going to be presented. And I think you guys will love it. So we will have an opening video for our show fairly soon. But I just wanted to thank you guys for helping out with that. I really appreciate it. Okay.
Colonel, sorry for interrupting.
Sure.
Any what book are we on to next, please? If you don't mind sharing.
I will post it. I don't know the exact title. It's out in my studio. And I don't want to get it wrong. So I'll post it in a little bit. I'm going to run out there right now. As a matter of fact, I have to take some pictures there's a gentleman that is helping me do that brain mapping, and I need to take pictures of all of the books so he can use AI to translate them into a list. And I told him that I need that for all of you guys too. So as soon as he compiles the list, I'm going to be able to post it. And I think that's going to be huge, so that we will have a consolidated list, because I didn't want to have to type all that crap in. So he's going to use AI to do that. So anyway, another helper, another person on our team. We just keep collecting these brainiac people that know how to do all this stuff that I don't know how to do. So I can't thank you guys enough for everybody's help in all of this. You guys have been absolutely amazing. So anyway, all right. Stand by. I will post it this afternoon. So if anybody wants to order it on Amazon, you can do that this evening. Okay. Take care, everybody. See ya.